Welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the high bar squat versus the low bar squat and how you can implement these two movements in your training to get stronger and hopefully move the most weight. So in order to compare these two movements, first we have to understand what is the difference between a high bar and a low bar squat. And all we are saying whenever I say high bar, I am talking about the bar position as it goes across your back, right? So a high bar position would be that classic sitting the bar directly on top of your traps, high up on your back. Whereas a low bar position, you may lower the bar down onto your rear delts, and you'll see some lifters get it even further down their back. Now, playing with where the bar is on your back will change the biomechanics of how the movement is done. So I've drawn two pretty simple diagrams here, right? One of a high bar position on a lifter and one of a low bar position on a lifter completing a squat. The first thing you'll notice is I've set both of the lifters at below parallel, right? So this would be a legal 2-depth squat in a powerlifting competition. Now, when we do this, we can then look at the lever arms of their body, and looking at those levers, we can then draw conclusions on where different forces are going to be applied to actually complete the lift. So first, let's go ahead and focus on this high bar squatter here. You'll notice the bar is placed high up on their shoulders, right? And to properly complete a squat, you'll notice the weight has to stay over top of the lifter's midfoot at all times, right? That's going to keep you balanced. If you're not over the midfoot, you will fall backwards or fall forwards until you reach that center of gravity. Now, with the bar placed up high on the shoulders, in order to stay over the midfoot, the knee has to travel forward more, and this allows for a higher angle to the torso, right? So we've got a larger angle to the torso, and then you're going to have a more acute angle between the lower leg and the upper leg, the hamstrings and the quads, right? So what this actually does is it decreases the torque on the spine, right? Because we've got a much more upward angle of your back, and the load force is a more acute angle here, right? That's getting into some physics. And then because this is more of an acute angle, this exercise is going to focus more on your quads, right? So that's why you may hear someone say a high bar squatter is more quad dominant rather than hamstring dominant. It's because of the biomechanics of this movement. Now, we can then compare this to the low bar squat and understand how these two are different. So the low bar squat is going to be quite the opposite. And if I go back to my purple marker here, we're going to have a much smaller angle from the back to the hips, and then you're going to have a larger angle from the hips to the shin and the calf. And what this does is it makes your back and your hips the predominant lever arm to produce force when you are low bar squatting. So the results here are that you're going to work different musculature by doing these two, right? This is going to work more quads, and this is going to be more back and hamstrings. You might hear this called the posterior chain, right? Now, why most competitive powerlifters tend to low bar squat is, generally speaking, your low back and hamstrings are going to be stronger in conjunction than just your quads. So most lifters can squat more with the low bar position than they can with this high bar position. Now, that does not mean that you should always only low bar, or it does not mean that everyone is stronger with this low bar position. There are plenty of very strong lifters. Bryce Lewis, for example, Mike Tushear, as of late, they squat high bar, right? And they do this in competition, and it's not because of pride, it's because that's where they're stronger, right? Or maybe they have potential low back issues that they're working around where they want to focus on the quads. So you can work both of these movements into your training to great success, right? You may, if you're a low bar squatter, you might want to high bar squat in the off season or as a secondary squat day in order to focus on your quads while still being specific to the squatting movement. And vice versa, if you're a high bar squatter, doing some low bar squats could help you. Okay? The last thing I want to mention here is carry over to other lifts. You know, a low bar squat is going to tax your low back and hamstrings. So it may affect something like your deadlift later on in a meet or later on in the week for training. If you do heavy low bar squatting, your deadlift might be affected. Whereas if you are a high bar squatter, you may not feel that effect nearly as much. So these are all things to take into account when you are picking between one or the other. Hopefully this gave some clarity on how the biomechanics of these two squats change what they do for you and your strength angles. So hopefully you all can implement this into your own training. And if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Leave comments down below if you have any other questions. And I'll see you in the next one. Happy training.